Hello, welcome back to BIOL1322 Summaries. This is Chapter 3, which is over the actual digestive process in the human body. This is going to be really important for understanding how we take in food and what that food does as it moves through us. So we're going to start off with our summary of the different sections. The molecules and cells is first up. I already have also posted two other videos over chemistry and how the actual atoms form bonds and how those bonds create the macromolecules. So those are in separate videos. I'm just going to relate those back to the material of cells. I'm going to talk a little bit about hunger and then look mostly at the digestive anatomy and physiology of how we actually break down, absorb food, what it all does, and talk a little bit about digestive disorders. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a cell. I'm not going to rehash how chemistry works. You should check that out in those other videos. So I want to talk about cells. So a cell is a little thing, like we have a diagram here, so you can see the nucleus, mitochondria, and all of that. Those are all parts of the cell. The cell is a living thing. It is the smallest unit of life, which means that it is alive, but it is made of things that are not alive. If you wrap your head around that for a second, that means that each of your cells in your body is maintaining homeostasis, but the parts inside it are not. They are just contributing to that overall effort. And so you can see that the cell has three main parts, or at least human cells have a nucleus. Not all cells do, but ours do. That's the big thing in the middle. There's the part going around the outside, which is the phospholipid bilayer that forms the cell membrane. And then the other stuff that's inside the cell, which is mostly water, but also has a bunch of other organelles, is the cytoplasm. And so the cell membrane is made of phospholipids, which, remember, the word lipid means it's oil. So that's one of the uses of oil in our body is used to build cell membranes. The nucleus has the cell's DNA, which contains its information on how to make more cell parts. The other stuff that's around the nucleus, the ribosomes, mitochondria, and endoplasmic reticulum, those are really important because when I say that something is alive, that means it rebuilds itself over time. Think about a rock. A rock is not alive. Now, rocks are really tough, but over time, wind and water and whatever else is going to cause it to erode, and it doesn't grow back. Mountains don't grow back, but your body regenerates from injury as long as it's alive. Your body grows new parts that, and that's a key thing about homeostasis, about being alive. Cells rebuild their parts. Now, every part of a cell, and all the proteins and even the phospholipids, are being created at all times to rebuild the parts of the cell as it breaks down. Now, how do we rebuild those parts? Well, we need food. We'll talk more about protein synthesis when we get to the chapter on proteins, which is one of the main ways that new parts of the cell are built is with proteins. But for now, we want to make sure we understand that the cell uses its organelles, the nucleus, mitochondria, ribosomes, etc., to rebuild the parts of the cell. So our cells have a certain demand for materials to rebuild themselves, to create energy and to create new parts and so forth. And so the cells are basically they're beholden to your digestive system to provide it with your cells with nutrients. When you eat food, those nutrients go into the blood. The cells receive the blood. So if the cells aren't getting enough nutrients, they can die. And so maintaining the correct amount of nutrients in your body and your blood is a really important part of homeostasis for your overall body survival. Now, the digestive function, or excuse me, I guess I should say the hunger, the homeostasis of maintaining enough nutrients in your blood is managed by the hypothalamus, and that's a part of the brain. You can see it's attached to the pituitary gland, and the hypothalamus receives information from, I guess you could say, from three sources, three pathways. And so one is that the GI tract, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, has its entire nervous system all by itself, and that nervous system sends signals up to the brain mostly through what's called the vagus nerve, but through other pathways as well. Um, and so your digestive system signals your brain depending to indicate how hungry or how full you are. This is part of why your stomach actually swelling up actually causes you to stop being hungry, because your digestive system has a bunch of nerves that signal the brain and signal that you're not hungry anymore. And because if you ignored that signal and you kept eating, you could actually rupture your stomach or your intestines. That's the thing that can actually happen. So that's one pathway. The next pathway is of signaling your brain to tell you how hungry you are is hormones, and there's a lot of different hormones that influence hunger. There's two in particular that we're going to see down the road as well, which is leptin and ghrelin. Now, leptin is secreted by fat tissue, adipose tissue, and so the more fat you are, the more fat you have, the more leptin you secrete into your blood. And then ghrelin is secreted by the digestive system. Now, leptin decreases hunger and ghrelin increases hunger. So they're what's called antagonistic hormones. They work against each other. So leptin causes you to be less hungry, which is the idea of this is that when you eat a lot of food and build a lot of adipose tissue, that adipose tissue secretes leptin, which makes you less hungry. So that because you have plenty of adipose tissue. And so, for example, there are experiments. And so, for example, there are experiments in mice that show that if the mice do not have leptin or they don't secrete it or they don't receive the signal, they're leptin sensitive, then they don't stop eating. They tend to eat more than other mice and they gain a lot of weight. And some humans also, as theorized, have the same issue, and that's why some people routinely carry 300 or 400 pounds, and that's just normal for them because their hunger signal is not is different from the norm. Ghrelin is the opposite. Ghrelin stimulates hunger. Ghrelin is secreted when we're hungry, especially when you start eating food. That's what makes food taste so good. They always say that the best spice is hunger. That's what makes everything taste better. Ghrelin is actually stimulated. The ghrelin binds to a molecule or binds to a receptor in the hypothalamus. Ghrelin is mimicked by another molecule called THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which also binds to the same receptor. THC is, of course, the active ingredient in marijuana, which is why marijuana makes you hungry, makes food taste good, is because it simulates that action of ghrelin. The third pathway of hunger is what you're actually eating. How quickly it causes you to lose hunger depends on what's in the food. So solid foods, stimulate or inhibit hunger more than liquids. You could say that proteins are supposed to have the highest satiety, and lipids sit in your stomach for longer, so that also increases satiety. And so different foods are going to cause you to become hungry sooner rather than later. So that's also a pathway of information going to your brain. All right, so the main part of Chapter 3 is over the anatomy and the physiology of the digestive system. So the digestive system is divided into two kinds of organs. They're color-coded on this diagram. The blue organs are the organs of the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract. And the GI tract is the tube that actually runs through your body. So that's the mouth, the throat or pharynx, the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then the rectum. So those are the organs that the materials actually pass through your body. Then in orange on the other side of the diagram, you can see the accessory organs. So that includes the salivary gland, which secretes saliva, your liver, which secretes bile, your gallbladder, which actually excretes the bile into your digestive system, pancreas secretes digestive enzymes. Technically also things like your teeth and your tongue are also accessory organs. And so, that's also something on there. You are going to have to know all of these guys. You're going to have to understand how they all work. That is important, partially because it matters for you. So if you know there's something wrong with one organ in your body, you know what effects that would have on your diet. And also partially, you want to make sure that we understand how all this works, because the breakdown of food and absorption of food is going to be different depending on what's in the food. So we need to talk a little about food and how food is broken down. And so in order to understand how food is broken down, we have to remember what's in food. We had 6 nutrients that we listed earlier in chapter 1. And so 3 of them don't need digestion. Vitamins, minerals, and water do not need to be digested. They can just be absorbed straight into in through your digestive tract. But the other 3, which is protein, carbohydrates, and lipids, have to be broken apart. Now that's not true. Technically, all the time, technically, you could actually, drink something that's already been chemically digested. You could drink like a kind of superfood smoothie, and it would already be digested for you. That's the same, but that's just running it through a blender isn't going to be good enough because you really need to break apart the carbohydrates all the way down to the individual sugar molecules. You need to break down the proteins all the way down to the individual amino acids. And same thing, the fats have to be broken apart. And not only the fat molecules have to be broken apart, but the fat droplets have to be separated out from each other. So each of those, it requires use of enzymes. So I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to go back a couple slides. When I talked about cells and I talked about producing things with the endoplasmic reticulum, the ribosomes, mitochondria, one of the things that the cells of your digestive system do is produce the enzymes that break down your food, right? And so that actually requires energy and nutrients. They said that when soldiers came to liberate the victims of the Holocaust, the last victims of the Holocaust, and they were so starved. I don't know if you've seen. I'm sure you've seen pictures of very skeletal people. They tried feeding them, and they would just throw up all the food. They couldn't keep it down because they did not have enough energy and enough nutrients left in their body to produce the digestive enzymes, which are listed on, you can see I have a couple samples of them here. Fat is broken down with lipase, protein is broken down with proteases like pepsin and trypsin. Amylase is used to break down starch into sugar. Sugar, actually, like pure glucose, doesn't need to be digested. It's already been broken down. It already is broken down. So if you're looking at, for example, high fructose corn syrup, it's just glucose and fructose. You don't need to digest those. They're already individual sugar molecules. But if you just take cornstarch with a spoon, I don't know if you've ever done that. I don't recommend it. But you can just eat cornstarch, and you still need to digest the cornstarch down until it's broken down into glucose. Well, that's done with amylases. Those are enzymes that break down starch into sugar. So nowadays, by the way, if they find someone who is on the verge of death from starvation, whether they've been imprisoned or if they're at end stage and anorexia nervosa or whatever, you have to give them an IV now because your digestive system actually requires energy in order to do this breaking down, to actually produce the digestive enzymes. So the main organs of the digestive system, again here, of these main organs, the most important one is the small intestine. That's on our list right there. The small intestine is the organ that actually absorbs nutrients. And so that means that when you take a burger and you bite it and you chew it and you break it apart, all that stuff you have to do because it's a burger and because it's not just a nutrient broth. If you just drink a nutrient broth, you don't really need your salivary glands or mouth or anything except as a tube. You don't really need your esophagus to do anything. It doesn't really do anything anyway. It's just a tube. Your stomach secretes acid that kills bacteria. It helps to denature proteins. And that's really important if you're eating a burger. And then your pancreas and gallbladder secrete digestive enzymes and bile from the gallbladder, which is produced in the liver. Those help break apart the molecules into smaller and smaller molecules so you can digest them and then absorb them. The digestion, chemical digestion, starts in the mouth and it happens in the stomach as well. A lot of it takes place in the small intestine, but the small intestine also is the organ of absorption. And so if you don't absorb everything in the small intestine, whatever you don't absorb passes to the large intestine. So normally indigestible materials like fiber, there's lots of fiber in vegetables, normally lots of materials pass through from the small intestine to the large intestine. They pass through and become our feces, and they go out the rectum. If you have a digestive disorder where you can't break down a certain kind of for example, a certain kind of sugar, like lactose, if you're lactose intolerant, we call you lactose intolerant, because you can't break down lactose into the individual sugar, glucose and fructose, or glucose and galactose molecules that you can then absorb. And so the small intestine can't absorb lactose. So if it's not broken apart, then the lactose goes to the large intestine. And there's bacteria in your large intestine they're supposed to be there. Everyone has them, like E. coli. That's a normal bacteria that lives in your large intestine and makes up part of your feces. If you feed E. coli a whole lot of lactose, they tend to produce a lot of acid and gas and things, which is why people who are lactose intolerant, they drink milk, either because they don't know they're lactose intolerant or because they don't care because they're craving it. Then they have to go lock themselves in the bathroom for a while. So again, we're seeing that the different organs have different functions. We have to know what each of those functions is. I don't know. The liver is often thought of as a really important digestive organ. The liver's main functions actually are storing nutrients after they're absorbed. Blood going from the small intestine, carrying all the sugar, amino acids, so forth, vitamins, goes to the liver. The liver stores the vitamins, it stores fat, it transforms carbs into fat, things like that. It's the pancreas that actually secretes the most of the digestive juices that actually carry the lipases, proteases, and amylases. Those are mostly produced in the pancreas. Now, pepsin is produced in the stomach, salivary amylase is produced in the saliva, so there's other digestion that goes on as well. But it's the small intestine where most of the digestion and absorption happens. So when we look at the different ways that things can go wrong in your digestive system, we want to make sure we understand what's what. So for example, heartburn is a pain in the chest, and some people mistake it for actual pain in their heart, but it's actually a problem with the esophagus. Specifically, the little sphincter, little ring of muscle at the bottom of your esophagus is normally closed. But if it weakens and acid from your stomach goes up into your esophagus is not protected from acid like your stomach is. And so we call that gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD, which the main symptom is heartburn. So that's a problem with the esophageal sphincter, gastroesophageal sphincter. An ulcer is a weakening of the lining of the stomach, because remember I just said the stomach is protected from acid. So an ulcer is a weakening in that lining, and so then the acid can burn through. It used to be thought to only be caused by stress, but it's since been shown that it can be caused by stress, because stress can cause you to secrete more stomach acid. But it's often caused by a bacterium, Helicobacter pylori. The guy who proved that actually no one believed him, and so he actually drank a vial full of Helicobacter pylori and got a bunch of ulcers, and then he drank an antibiotic and they went away. But you're not supposed to experiment on yourself, but I guess when no one believes you, then you get away with it. And then the third issue that's with what we say the upper digestive tract, meaning the esophagus and stomach, is vomiting, which is where your stomach contracts and expels materials. The gastroesophageal sphincter relaxes, and then you expel mostly acid, stomach acid, and a lot of mucus, because usually when you're about to vomit, you tend to swallow a lot of mucus to try and soothe your stomach. And so if you vomit, there tends to be a lot of acid, a lot of mucus in it, and whatever was irritating your stomach. Vomiting is not just caused by what you eat, though. Technically, you can, first of all, it can also be from what you drink. So if you drink a lot of alcohol is toxic, you vomit it out. You can also chug like 2 gallons of water or so, and you'll start just throwing it all up, which is very important, because if you don't throw up all the water, you can actually die from hypotonic hydration. So if you ever feel like throwing up, it's generally a good idea to do it. Just let it out. You never know what's in there. So those first 3 are part of your, what we say, the upper digestive tract, or upper GI tract. The other problems, the next 3, diarrhea, constipation, and irritable bowel syndrome, are problems with the lower digestive tract. So diarrhea is where you're not absorbing enough nutrients. So like I mentioned with lactose intolerance, when you actually drink milk or something else with a lot of lactose in it, you then get the shits, and that's a result of there being a lot of extra material, nutrients in your large intestine. Constipation is the opposite problem, where you absorb too much. You might say, wait, don't you want to absorb everything? Well, yeah, you want to absorb all the carbohydrates, you want to absorb the lipids, but it's healthy for you to retain some water in your digestive system so that it can pass through your body. If you absorb all the water, then all that's left are indigestible materials, which can cake together and get really hard and and don't pass through your digestive system very easily. Usually, the main treatment for constipation is normally to eat a lot of fiber. Actually, what doctors will prescribe you Metamucil, which is really just oat fiber and other things like that. They tell you to eat a lot of vegetables, drink a lot of water. And what happens is that fiber is indigestible, so it's not broken apart into sugar. It's not absorbed. So it stays in your digestive tract and it traps water with it through the power of osmosis, which is, of course, mentioned in the chemistry video. And so by trapping extra water with it, and it helps aid the passage of the feces through your digestive tract, that's how you normally would treat constipation. And then irritable bowel syndrome is kind of a catch-all. Like there's something wrong with your large or small intestine. We don't know what. It's usually when they try to be as specific as they can to find what's wrong. One example of things that can cause irritable bowel syndrome is celiac disease, where you have a gluten sensitivity or gluten allergy, or where gluten actually damages the lining of your small intestine. Some people eat gluten, then they end up with diarrhea and pain and so forth, inflammation. So, and of course, the last thing can happen anywhere in the body is cancer. And it's more common the more places that you have a lot of stem cells. Cells are constantly growing and making new cells, because cancer is a deviation of your normal healthy cells to go rogue and start making lots of extra cells that aren't needed. They just kind of all clump together and take up resources, and they don't contribute to your body's function anymore. Cancer is like I said, it's common in places where you have a lot of stem cells. So we have a lot of stem cells in our skin, in our digestive tract, the lining of the breast, and so that's why you see breast cancer, skin cancer, prostate cancer, and actually intestinal and stomach cancer. Stomach cancer is a lot more common in other countries. For whatever reason, in the U.S., stomach cancer is not as common, but colon cancer is pretty common in the U.S. You see that. And so that can, like I said, it can happen anywhere, but especially where you have a lot of stem cells. All right, so that does it for Chapter 3. There's a lot of material here. I know I went a little fast just going over everything. I'm just trying to get you set up with it, but you're going to have to take the time to go through and learn all these different organs, how they contribute to our overall health. So I hope that makes sense. And as always, make sure you post on the discussion board, especially to ask me if you have any questions or send me an email. Thanks, guys. And next up is after your first test, we're going to be working on Chapter 4. Thanks, guys.